everyone. I'm here with Bethany Saltman, who is the author of this brilliant book, Strange Situation, A Mother's Journey into the Science of Attachment. And she's not just the author of this book that I fell in love with. She's also an editor, a researcher, a Zen student, a mindfulness mentor, a book writing coach, and she helps writers and entrepreneurs with the creative process. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Bethany.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so firstly, I feel like, Bethany, your book, it just found me. I didn't go searching for it. I found it at this local bookstore and it popped out and I just started it and got completely hooked. And that's one of the things that really stands out for me about your book is you really speak about the process of something finding you, right? The way Mary Ainsworth found you. So for everyone who's listening in, this is a book about Bethany's journey into the deep ends of motherhood, inspired by her own daughter. I think that she's put in 10 years of research into this book. I think that the most important thing here that really struck me when I started reading it was the way you mentioned your postpartum depression and the way you spoke about the desire to be close to the baby and the desire to be separate and how delicate that balance is and how complicated emotionally that can make us feel. And I would love to hear more about that. And there's a beautiful excerpt that captures a little bit of the essence of this feeling that I know that we spoke about having you read.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I'll just read that and then we can talk more about it.
Sure.
Well, maybe I should give a little bit of setup.
Okay.
So my daughter was born, she's 14, almost 15 in the other room doing Zoom school right now. When she was born, I loved her with all my heart. I felt a tremendous connection to her, but I also felt like myself. And myself is someone who is a little impatient, a little edgy. I have, I felt some resentment. I felt frustrated at the demands of a small baby. And I was really surprised by that because I had this idea that the maternal experience would sort of wipe me clean and into some new person. And it turns out that I did have a short bit of actual postpartum depression that came on in month 4, which is, I guess, somewhat common. But then that lifted very, just as suddenly as it arrived. And I still felt a lot of that anguish about just my relationship with her. And so that's what set me off on this journey into attachment and into the science of attachment. So this bit that I'm reading here is just a short bit from the prologue about my feelings and getting involved in this very lengthy process of studying attachment. It's only now that I can see that it's because I love Azalea so much that I've spent the last 10 years of my life trying to get to the bottom of that love, only to see that it's bottomless. And though I had always felt broken, by studying attachment, I've learned that we are all born with something utterly, totally, miraculously unbreakable, which is why my story of loneliness, of something being wrong, of the shame of feeling separate has fallen apart. This is the untelling.
This is perhaps like my favorite passage of the book. And by this point, I was completely drawn in. So the book actually, it walks you through your process of wondering. You seem to have this intuitive need in the way that you tell your story in the book to just really know, to get to the bottom of how you're impacting your daughter. And at the same time, running parallel to that is this curiosity and this not knowing about how you were impacted by your mother. And this is what I loved about everything that you brought into the book, because it really makes us reflect on our children, our unborn children, and our parents. So we have that whole connectedness through the generations. And at the same time, it's your experience of research by Mary Ainsworth that was conducted 50 to 70 years ago, and how that's impacting you. And that's what really stood out to me, because for anyone who's reading this book, it's not the clinical research, it's the experience of what that research really does for you. And there's this one very heavy kind of line that I loved. It says, "Where does a baby's unshared heartbreak go?" And that really stood out for me. So just for what we've been through or what our children go through. And I think that brings us to the place of, where does it go, Bethany? So in terms of what is attachment theory, this theory that really holds your whole book together, that's helped you understand motherhood and much of your own journey. What is attachment theory really? Where does this heartbreak of a baby go? And what is secure and insecure attachment?
Yes. Well, where does a baby's unshared heartbreak go? You know, the reason why that question is so important is not about the heartbreak. It's about the not being able to share it. We all have our hearts broken, right? From the minute, I mean, one could say being born is your first heartbreak.
Right.
It's your first separation. It's your first tear in intimacy, and true, total intimacy. And but ideally, from an attachment point of view, we are sharing that heartbreak enough sometimes, so it's not, as adults, we sometimes think that, we're damaged because we weren't attuned to 100% all the time, because nobody is. But attachment theory really shows us, and Mary Ainsworth's work in particular, that there is this resilient human system. And I often say it's like digestion or respiration. It's the whole body, whole mind. Like, this thing is just happening. And we don't always have perfect breathing. We certainly don't always have perfect digestion. Things affect our breathing, things affect our gut. Culture, trauma, feelings, media, all the things that come in through the senses affect the way we breathe, affect the way we digest, and affect our attachment. So our parents are affected by their environment and their gut and their breathing, and then that affects us. But there's no perfect system. And so where does the baby's unshared heartbreak go? That is a religious question. That's a spiritual question that I am really interested in. I don't have the answer. But what's important about the question is the sharing part. And so attachment theory is a way of understanding this human, it's mammalian, actually. All primates, mammals have this attachment system, and they do it in different ways. And what it is a system that has evolved to keep our children alive, to keep the species going. And so that radar of kind of, needing to know where your parent is, because your parent keeps you alive, they keep you fed, they keep you in shelter. And these feelings of love have evolved. This is the theory. These feelings of love and attachment, affection, all those warm feelings of wanting to be close to someone, they have a very important evolutionarily based purpose, and that is to keep us close, so to keep us alive. And so our attachment systems really come to light in times of stress and danger. So our attachment system is always there, but it's like, again, like breathing and digestion. We mostly notice it when there's a problem. So when the child is under stress or duress, they automatically, look for the attachment figure. It's like, a rabbit hops to a place, a den. A person hops to a person. And so that's the attachment system. And what Mary Ainsworth, what she noticed, and what is so, so important is this, what she calls a secure base. So that thing of when a baby is afraid or hungry or ill, or an adult, and we turn toward the attachment figure, that is a secure base relationship. And that should be working reasonably well enough for the baby to have some sense that when I'm in trouble, my attachment figure is going to be there, like a den, like a pile of leaves, like a warm space to comfort me and get to give me what I need. Not all the time, and it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes the den is cold, sometimes it's wet, sometimes it feels a little dangerous, but it's doing the job. And so that's what that parent baby, that's what the caregiver relationship, that's its primary function. And that really doesn't change as we grow.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that really stands out for me where you say it's not perfect. Sometimes it's cool and dark, but because really that's your, I think that's probably gives a lot of mothers and fathers, and we'll come to the fathers part as well, and caretakers, a sense of relief, which is really your journey through the book as well.
Yes.
And then you do speak about how having that compassion for ourselves creates a better connection when we are co-regulating with the babies.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's really important. It can seem like some kind of new age slogan that, self-care is other care from an attachment point of view and from a spiritual point of view, because we are one thing from a, mystical point of view. It can seem like some kind of, shtick that, it should like inspire you to go get your nails done, or, some kind of, but it's so much deeper and bigger than that. We the first person we talk to every day is ourselves. And that is what we are, expressing 24 hours a day to everybody. And our babies are physiologically wired to tune into us.
Yeah. Okay.
So, so there it is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes. And that is something that really stood out in your book for me, is the way you keep talking about how we are one. And I really want to get into that. I'm just wondering, before that, since we have a lot of people listening who might not know what secure and insecure attachment is, can you say a little bit about what secure attachment looks like in adults and why it's important?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And, I also want to just say that I am not a psychologist or a clinician of any kind. I'm a writer, as you announced, in the beginning. And so this is I've studied it for a long time, but I am on a mission to present the sort of nuggets, the jewel of this research to parents, and to give them relief and to help them trust themselves. And that you've got what it takes, and you don't have to follow any particular parenting style, especially not so-called attachment parenting, which is the exact opposite of what the science of attachment teaches. And we can get into that. I don't know if people in Pakistan are doing attachment parenting, but it's a nightmare in my opinion. So a secure attachment looks like someone who trusts that there is a secure base functioning for them. So one way I like to put it is a person who knows where their bread is buttered. It doesn't mean that you, always feel good, or that you're happy all the time, or anything like that. I mean, that's just not human. But a secure baby and a secure adult, they can regulate themselves. because they, you know, the child knows that the parent will help them. As we get older, we internalize that parent to be what's called the internal working model. So, you know, those people who are just kind of like are able to, you know, they have grit, they're able to fail and start again. They
Mm,
are able to feel all of their feelings. That's really the telltale heart of attachment. Someone who values their feelings, values relationships, is willing to get hurt, is willing to take risks, is willing and able to be vulnerable. You know, like a
mm,
really insecurely attached adult, they just don't have they've been conditioned for many years to not know how to open their heart. They have been conditioned to be afraid of emotion because it wasn't met when they were young. So when someone feels cold or distant, it's not necessarily that they are choosing that. It's that they don't have that capacity. They haven't learned to trust their own feelings.
right.
And so that's what is really, I mean, there are all other kinds of, you know, checklisty kinds of things, like, you know, securely attached teenagers tend to use drugs in less dangerous ways. They tend to be better in school, not because they're smarter, but because they have that grit and determination. They tend to be better in social situations, again, not because they're naturally charming, but because they are aware of their own feelings. And then they have the mentalization capacity to discern the feelings of others and be emotionally intelligent. But
Mm,
it all comes down to knowing yourself. That's what a secure attachment really gives us. It gives us confidence in our own feelings and the trust that we can feel what we feel and get through it.
right. Okay. And Bethany, at the same time, I'm thinking, even in your book, through your experience, you know, you talk about stumbling upon the strange situation experiment, which was a study done with mothers and babies to try to determine how securely or insecurely attached the baby was. And you talk about watching a securely attached baby that doesn't look securely attached at all. So
Right.
just to kind of wipe out what everyone might be imagining a securely attached
Yeah.
baby looks like, can you touch upon that a little bit?
Sure, sure. So the strange situation is actually still very much in use around the world. It's not an experiment so much as a research tool. So it's
Right.
used in attachment labs around the world every day, still tens of thousands of times. This is the gold standard for observing and assessing attachment relationships.
Right.
And what it is, it's a series of comings and goings, and we don't have to get into the details, but the time that is most important in the strange situation is it's a series of separations and reunions. And when the mother leaves and the child is left alone, secure babies behave in all kinds of ways. Some kids are really vocal and they scream their heads off, they're terrified. These are 1-year-old babies.
Yeah.
Some are kind of relaxed and they're, you know, you can tell they're nervous. Every baby left alone in a strange environment will be under stress. But what is important is what happens when the mother returns or the caregiver. Doesn't, you know, it's been done with every single kind of person and caregiver. When the primary attachment figure returns, what happens? Does the baby get back to their homeostasis? Do they get back to their version of normal? So some babies are just sloppy and wild and emotional and intense and challenging. And
Mm,
they're always like that. And then when they're left alone, they get extra like that. And when the mother comes and they are able to be soothed, they're still intense and difficult, perhaps, but they are back to normal for them. So a
mm,
secure baby does not mean that they don't care if the mother leaves. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A securely attached baby will respond in whatever way that they respond, but they're able to be soothed by the attachment figure. That's the secure attachment, or that's the secure base relationship I was talking about before.
right. Yes, yes. And I know, like, I think globally everywhere in every culture, perhaps. There's so much pressure that we feel as mothers. I know that when my daughter started to go to school, over here we start school really early at like 3:30. So it's not the same thing, but that strange situation was kind of embedded in my mind, and I would go to pick her up and I would be waiting, and every day I would be documenting. And I think we can get really, really hooked into really wondering about ourselves in the process. And I know that there are probably so many mothers who are listening to this talk, really feeling the pressure of just what is Bethany going to say today that's going to determine, how I'm parenting. So you kind of, one of the most impossible questions you mention in your book is, how much responsibility do we take for our children's problems, and conversely, for their happiness?
Yeah.
And as you walk through this, you conclude that regardless of what we face in adulthood, love in childhood will always make it easier to handle what we have to face.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So and about that love, the quality of that love for all the kind of anxious mothers who might be listening in, you speak about the quality of the excellent informant. And this really stood out for me. I know you have, a group where you study Mary Ainsworth's secret teachings, and I'm excited for that to start. Maybe you can share more on that right in the end. But for me, this was really felt like one of the secret teachings. I've studied attachment, and this is something that has never ever come up in all these years, and all this, therapy groups and constant development, is something that you mentioned that Mary discovered in her studies with mothers. It was about, maybe you can say a bit more, but it wasn't about how the mother was when they went to interview her, or what she was like, or necessarily what she did, but it was about whether or not she was an excellent informant about her baby. So can you say a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. Yes. And first of all, this idea of the secret teachings of Mary Ainsworth is so important, because you don't know how many people who are experts in this field who have never read her primary texts.
Yes.
This is unacceptable. So as part of my mission, I am, I really want to bring her secret teachings to light. So I am going to be doing a study group with people once a month. And the details will be on my website soon. And I want to just invite professionals, clinicians, mothers, anybody into this, so that we can explore this incredible work, because everybody's talking about attachment. Everyone's talking about attachment styles. And that's all derivative of this core science that this brilliant scientist did, and people are not getting it. So I'd like to explore that more. So what you're referring to is her first study of mothers and babies was in Uganda. She was there because her husband had a job there. She didn't want to be there. This was the second time she went somewhere because her husband wanted her to. That's another story for another time. And she had been working with John Bowlby, who was developing this theory of attachment that she did not buy. She thought he was wrong. And so when she ended up going to Uganda, she said, well, why don't I try I'm going to throw together a little study on my own. And so that's what she did. And so she found, it's such an amazing story, but I won't get into all the weeds, but she ended up working with 26 mothers and their babies. And she was the first white person that these people had ever seen. And so this was just an incredibly powerful experience for all of them. And so she just, spent a lot of time with them. She had a translator, and she did learn some of the language, but she spent a lot of time with these mothers, and she fell in love with them. And she just found them to be incredibly dignified and beautiful. And she loved the way they were with their babies. And she was so impressed. And she was a very sort of, 1950s kind of formal person. And she was really taken with these women because they were so respectful, and really she loved the way they taught manners to their babies. And it was a really interesting mix, because they were also potty training by, 4 months. And
Which is something that culturally happens here too.
oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Not at large, but in the more traditional areas, this is a norm.
Interesting. Yeah. So I love the combination of these like
Mhm.
super buttoned up women with, putting their naked babies over a hole or like having an accident on them, and they were just so relaxed about it. And so Mary was just taken with them. So cut to several months later when she was looking at her data, and she saw that there were you know 65% of or so seemed what she deemed secure, and then there were some that seemed insecure. And what she was trying to find variables of what made these relationships one of mutual delight. That's how she was defining this security, that the baby used the mother as a secure base, well and often, and that there was this marked experience of mutual delight. So she was trying to understand what was it that made them that way. And so she looked through, this was back when she was in Baltimore, and she was looking at her notes and trying to find the reasons why. And she came up with a couple of variables that really are incredible. One is not whether or not a woman breastfed, but whether or not she enjoyed it. Let's let that in. So first of all, that she thought to ask these African women if how they felt about breastfeeding. There's so much, noble savage kind of, stereotype of the African woman who's just like so free with her body and breastfeeding. And she actually broke that down and asked them how they felt about it. Turns out the women who enjoyed it had the more securely attached babies. And that could be for many reasons. The other variable is, there are two others. One is total amount of care, meaning how much time did the mother spend with the baby? Now, this is not to suggest that working outside of the home or daycare or anything like that is important and is primary. And Mary really made a case for why women should not interpret it that way. It's simply the fact that if you aren't there, you can't be sensitive to your baby. So we do need to clock the time.
Yeah, and Bethany, one of the things that really stood out about this for me was where you said Mary Ainsworth actually considered herself to be part of the feminist movement.
Totally.
And she speaks in favor, or the data is slightly in favor of working mothers too.
Absolutely.
Which was a huge sense of relief for me. So maybe if you could say a little bit about that also.
Sure. So, mothers, the time spent is important because you can't learn about your baby and be sensitive and have strong positive feelings if you're not there. So that's just a fact we can't deny. And then the third one is what you mentioned, mother's excellence as informant, which means when Mary asked her these questions, she said all the mothers seemed really hospitable and answered the questions well and were very polite. But when she looked back, she realized that some of them had rich data about questions about the baby's feeding, the baby's, potty training, the baby's language, the baby's feelings, the baby. While other mothers seemed to always want to talk about other things, which I thought was just so funny. And so what that points to is that these women are paying attention. And so to me, as a Zen practitioner, that's what is really the through line here. It's attention. Whether you're paying attention to your baby or whether you're paying attention to your own inner state, that is what is going to help you raise a securely attached baby. Paying attention, knowing your baby. And again, back to this idea of compassion for self is compassion for other. Someone who doesn't pay attention to their mind, I promise you, is not paying attention to the mind of another. Not because they don't want to, but because they don't know how. We don't have the capacity. So we can't mutually delight if we don't have capacity for delight. So for all the parents out there who are thinking, I'm going to say the thing that's going to tell them, ding, 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 my child's secure, I'm off the hook. That will never happen. We are all on the hook and we're all off the hook. what we need to do is, if we're serious about wanting to create security and attunement and sensitivity, the answer is to take care of ourselves, dig deep into who we are, heal our own wounds, get into therapy, practice your spiritual practice, whatever that is, and become curious about your own inner state, because that's what babies need. Babies need to feel like someone is there, not just there for them, but there.
Right. Yeah. And you really speak about your struggles with this with your daughter through the book, where there's some feelings of resentment, there's some frustration, there's a little bit of depression for those few months, and ultimately, it's not, with the research that you bring in, it's not what the mothers are actually doing. I love this part in the book where you say you were watching your daughter and you didn't know how important just watching was, or what it was the beginning of. And I would really love to read these few lines on how you speak about love. I didn't understand that the love between us is ultimately not even a feeling or anything to do, but a way of being, and that it gets passed down, not like a name, but more like a face, something you're born with, but that changes over time. So I absolutely love this, because what really stands out, with Mary Ainsworth being this feminist who says mothers can work, and there is a lot of positivity in babies having connections with other people, not just with the primary caregiver, and with really including your own struggles and the postpartum. And it's not about when you breastfed or how you breastfed, it's more just about a feeling.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Bethany, I know you've done a bunch of talks for your book, and I'm sure you get bombarded with questions about what to do, but the essence of your book is really just about how one feels.
Yeah.
And I know we're getting some questions pouring in, but that last line, like a face that changes over time. And I know one of the questions is about really being able to shift over time in terms of our attachment style, in terms of healing. And I know your entire book is centered around your own journey to discover your attachment style. And by the time you do, you find that you are securely attached, and that good enough, which is really the essence, that good enough mothering was really good enough.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about shifting our attachment styles. And I'm wondering if writing the book was a healing process. And one of the reasons I specifically ask is because in the book, you mentioned when someone says to you, you might not be able to write while your nervous system, your attachment system is that activated, and yet you are writing, because you say that creativity can be hindered when our nervous systems are activated in that way. But you are writing, so I know you might have been securely attached before, but I'm wondering if the process of allowing that creativity created some kind of healing.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was writing throughout, but it took me a long time, and it was hard. It was really, really difficult writing. I mean, not only was I incorporating a tremendous amount of research that I was learning from scratch, but I was writing about very difficult things. And as I was writing over all those years, it was changing. So, I think that the face metaphor is actually a good one, because, we constantly have to, if our goal is to accept ourselves and love ourselves, we have to keep doing that in new ways. I'm 51, and that face is changing, but the interesting thing is that, I have had the similar kinds of barriers to that love, even when I looked in the mirror and I was fresh faced and, whatever. So I think a lot of women have had that experience where you look at pictures of yourself when you're, in a bathing suit and you're 25 and you're like, oh my God, I was gorgeous. And you remember how you felt at that time. I didn't feel gorgeous. I was still struggling with the same, inner, the self-talk, the insults to myself, all of that stuff. And that's really where the attachment patterns lie. And the work that I did, there's a distinction between attachment patterns and attachment styles that's really important. We talk about attachment styles a lot, and styles refer to something that you can figure out by doing an online assessment tool, which lots of people find helpful. But that's not the work that I did, and that's not the work of Mary Ainsworth. That comes out of the Mary Ainsworth work. But her work and John Bowlby's work and the people of her legacy, they talk about attachment in terms of patterns. And it is a big difference, because a pattern is something that, like I said, when I look at myself in the mirror, I see I have a certain relationship to myself, and that is a pattern that can change over time, but it's an intricate kind of shift that needs to happen. Me going through this process was in many ways like going through analysis for 10 years. I just dug so deep into the details because I was writing a memoir. I had to hold up the details. And that's another thing that is what securely attached adults can do, is notice the details and tell the right amount and not get caught in, irrelevant facts, and be able to process and emerge through the experience of an unfolding story. So writing and attachment security are very well, they're a very good match. When we go through the writing journey, we become more secure. When we have a lot of insecurity, and which means we have a hard time connecting to ourselves, it's harder to write.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds very similar to the therapeutic process.
Very much.
Yes, where, kind of reflecting that story and holding a space for it, shedding light on it, having compassion for it. And just the way you mentioned writing is such a big thing. Journaling is such a big thing in the therapy world.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. I love that you mentioned right now that you are a writer and not a therapist, because I felt like that was really important. That really stood out to me when I read your book, because you are the modern kind of voice for attachment theory at this moment from Mary Ainsworth's work. And the book is doing really well. I'm wondering if I was feeling like you are representing a big percentage of the population of what's happening in this world right now, where terms that were once reserved for psychologists and therapists are now being owned by people, and understanding their internal experience is becoming critical. And we have lots of psych books that are being read by the general public now, but yours was by a non-therapist. So how important, do you notice this movement in terms of the last decade, and how important do you feel it is to give non-psych or therapists, lay people, a voice and a way of working with their internal world?
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's incredibly important. That's my goal, is to shame motherhood. That's one of my goals for mothers. And, since one of the hallmarks of a securely attached adult is that they value attachment, just by thinking about attachment, we are helping ourselves become more attuned to this process, and it will help all of our relationships and our mind and our coherence. So 100%, I think it's incredibly important. Do I notice a shift in the last 10 years? That I don't know. I mean, I live in the States. It's rough over here. People are simultaneously opening and closing. So, there's a tremendous amount of tension about people's capacity to even think critically, let alone feel.
Mm.
So I don't know. I mean, I it's scary what's going on in the world.
Right. Okay. So it's absolutely very polarized, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Um,
Some people are going super deep,
yeah.
and then there's a backlash, perhaps. I'm not sure. I love that you feel that. I hope you're right. Um,
Right.
yeah,
So, well, locally here, I mean, in Pakistan, in the last 10 years, there's been an enormous shift. Obviously, it is limited to certain SES backgrounds in terms of affordability and the luxury to really do that. But even just with social media in the world of Instagram, I actually was a little restricted till this year, till COVID happened. And I joined the world of Instagram properly.
me too.
I feel like, yeah, they're
Get each
huge.
other there, so that's so nice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it is really nice. And I was really surprised by the amount of people who were not therapists, but who were, mental health advocates, and
Yes.
so much happening over there,
In the
which I guess the States is a big chunk of it, but just around the world
I
in
see.
terms of social media and globalization, so much happening over there, over here also. Yeah.
What do you mean when you say you were restricted before COVID?
Oh, as in I just wasn't very active with
I
Instagram.
see. I see.
I didn't know much of what was happening on social media in terms of mental health awareness.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, no, there is definitely, but when things get big like that, they tend to get so tend to become slogans, and it's hard to keep it alive and sincere and detailed
Right.
as soon as a
Yeah.
lot of people start talking about it.
Yeah, yeah. Because in your book, what was refreshing, it was to go back to what you talk about of being a unit, of all of us being interconnected. I loved that. There's this one part, I just want to read this one line that you write about it. It says, "We think we are individuals, but in fact, we are thoroughly interdependent. We are a unit. We are a relationship." And I would love you to say a little bit more about what this means. And I know you've tied it in with some Buddhist concepts in the book. You mentioned that. And I'm wondering also, with everything that we do see in terms of mental health and the concept of the self, it's perhaps a very narrow view, especially what we see on social media, where there's a lot of emphasis just on me and I, almost as a separate entity. And probably not even just in the realm of mental health, but in probably every realm out there, that we're not as connected to what our ancestors before us or the generations that might come after us, but that we can kind of insulate in a bubble and operate from there. I'm wondering if that's something that you have felt. I know that I have felt that reading so many things. And if you can say a little bit more about this interconnectedness.
Yeah. So I'm a Zen practitioner and I've lived in a monastery and have worked with a teacher, and Zen, like any contemplative practice, and all religions have a contemplative mystical arm, if it's not like really part of the core teaching. That is the basic teaching that and I just did a post about this today. You and I are the same thing, but I am not you and you are not me.
Mm-hmm.
So that is in Buddhism we call it the oh my gosh, relative and absolute, the identity of relative and absolute. That we think that in fact we are separate, like you're in Pakistan, I'm in New York, but from a deeper point of view, you and I are the same thing. And that's something that you have to study and experience and reflect upon deeply as an individual. You're certainly not going to believe it because I say it, or because the Buddha said it, or because anybody says it. But it is a reality that, you know, sage after sage, mystic after mystic, teacher after teacher has pointed to, and that is my basic understanding of the world. And so when I discovered attachment and saw that the science confirms it, I
Mm.
was, you know, just thrilled because, you know, to me, attachment theory is um, the perfect interconnection between a spiritual understanding of the world and science and the relative world of kids and drama and feelings and, you know, the everyday experience.
Right.
So it's magical. I find it very magical.
Right, yes. And you also mention in your book how there's no real difference between nature and nurture. And
That's a false dichotomy.
yes, and how things do travel through the generations, which really does, if you can say maybe a little bit about that, there's no nature and nurture in our innate traits, but how it really does make us feel interconnected that,
Yes. Oh my gosh, absolutely. You know,
yeah,
I, again, am not a scientist, but my understanding of epigenetics, that's you know, the way the environment affects us in our genes. This is deep stuff. So, you know, the science of that has discovered that babies you know, there's a lot of studies on mice, of course, but we can really see this in twin studies, that there are certain things that come through our genetic lineage that are behavioral. So there was a study about, you know, whether or not rats are high licking or low licking, meaning like very, you know, affectionate and physical with their babies or not. And this trait was passed down through genes even when the babies were separated. So
mm,
this was something so this idea of epigenetics, that we develop certain behavioral, psychological, emotional traits through our parents who we may not have ever even met, that is profound and totally outside of the realm of anything I can describe to you right now. You know, that this is
mm,
above my pay grade, as it were, but
mm,
it really supports the mystical understanding of attachment being passed through the generations. And one of the things that really was powerful for me, and I wrote about this in the book, is my dad died when I was in my 30s. And me going through this process, I write about him in the book, and my thoughts about him, and my understanding of him currently has completely changed the way that I understand the past, which is going to affect my daughter and her sort of internal experience of her ancestors, which will affect her experience of her children.
mm,
So by
mm.
me doing this work in New York, you know, from 2010 to 2020, really is transforming so many people's pasts and futures.
Right, absolutely. And even just, I was just thinking, even just speaking here right now, impacting all of our past and futures. So that interconnectedness really does feel quite um, powerful.
Well, and it's happening whether we're aware of it or not. But
Yeah.
the more connected we become, then the more empowered we feel, the
Mm,
more connected we feel, the more compassionate we feel, and the more you know, delighted we feel in just the experience, and we're not so caught in this little bubble as you were describing.
right, yeah. And so as powerful and important as that feels, there is also this other element that you mentioned in the book, which is about mothers being overly involved with their babies. And so it's not just about being more and more connected or more and more attached or more and more
Right.
involved. And I'd like you to say a piece about that because over
Yes.
here, we're a collectivist society. So we live in these big joint families and
You're lucky.
um, Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. But one of the things, because I see so many people in therapy that people do often struggle with is enmeshment and figuring out, okay, so we are interconnected. How can we be interconnected and you still be you and I
Yeah,
still be me and we still
exactly.
be we? And that balance is something that people, I think, really struggle with. So if you can say a little bit about really over intrusive or very involved, perhaps
Yeah.
very involved parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we have the opposite problem. We think of ourselves as totally separate. We sleep separately, we do everything separately. And so
Right.
we have a hard time understanding that we're connected. But, and from what you're saying, if you're with people all the time, you sort of have the connection part, but you need to work on the separate part.
Yeah.
And, so from an attachment point of view, this feeling of attunement and sensitivity comes from the parent attuning to themselves so that they can read the other. So like when you hear music, if you don't have ears, you don't hear the music. So when you're trying to feel the frequency of your baby, if you don't have your heart open, you can't feel the baby. And so through culture, we are conditioned to hear and feel certain frequencies more than others. So in what you're describing, you're coming from a world where people are attuning to a certain need and a certain frequency of expression in babies and throughout the lifespan. And so the medicine is always the same. It's to increase our capacity as adults to attune to more of the baby. So, sometimes this isn't a problem, like if a baby is raised in the suburbs of New York and is super separate and on a bottle and sleeping in a crib and, all these separate things, pushed in a stroller, put in a car seat, plugged into a TV. From an attachment point of view, that might be just fine. They may like veer a little bit into the avoidant. They may not be the juiciest, most delighting person in the world, but from an attachment point of view, they could very well be perfectly secure. Same goes in your situation. If a child is feeling like their parent is just like up their, down their throat, up their whatever, and they have no space, that can be really frustrating. And you can feel like you need to bust a move and get out of there. But from an attachment point of view, it might not be a problem because the parent is still doing their basic job of providing security when the child needs it. Now,
Right.
if the child is saying, I need you to step off, and the parent doesn't listen, then the parent needs to do the work of attuning to what the baby needs, the child, the teenager, the grown adult. So the medicine is always the same. It's about having that capacity and growing our capacity and not thinking we know everything and not having and working through the shame of feeling like, oh, my child is telling me that I'm not perfect. Well, for some of us, that's unacceptable and we can't tolerate it. From an attachment point of view, learning how to tolerate our own feelings of shame, of regret, of resentment, of impatience, of frustration will go a long way with helping to create a bigger, more spacious, more delighting container.
Right. Yeah.
That
Because
answer your question?
yes, because you're really speaking about attuning there, which we can't do when you say that Mary Ainsworth said, when we're overly involved and we're seeing the baby as an extension of ourselves, we don't
Right.
know that we need to attune.
Right.
We don't know that until we have another separate human being that requires us to attune, right? So I think that really does make sense. I know we're running short of time. I would love to hear about your future plans, but Bethany, I was about to call you Mary for a second.
Oh,
Bethany, one quick thing. You did mention how attachment parenting is so different than attachment theory. And I'm wondering if you have one or two things to say about that.
Yes. So like we're talking about right now, attachment parenting is suggesting a certain type of behavior. So, and as we just explored with your example of the collectivist culture, where sometimes you're just, you're attuned, you're paying attention and you're over involved because you don't see the child as a separate person. You're not attuning, you're projecting.
Right.
And so attachment parenting, if it's not your own desire to do those things, to co-sleep, to wear the baby, to, da, 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 then you're doing it from an outside in point of view. And that is not going to serve anybody. If you're nursing on demand and filled with resentment, the baby is going to feel the resentment, not the nursing on demand. We cannot follow someone else's rules. Certainly we can try to bring ourselves to do what's right, what we feel good about. I'm not suggesting that we just have a laissez-faire, do whatever kind of attitude, but trying to follow someone else's rules especially about attachment, is just ironic and does not work, because attachment is something that comes from within and we have to feel connected to ourselves. And if we're following Dr. Sears's orders in order to feel attached, it's just, it's silly.
Right. Okay. So I guess that is one of the takeaway messages from your book also, which is so much about how it's about what we feel and what feels right in terms of attachment, or when to connect, when to attune, how to attune, and that there's no real right way, or too much, or even too little.
Exactly. Yeah. We are our own tuning forks. We must learn to pay attention to our instrument, ourselves, in order to attune to another. It will not work without that.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes absolute sense. Bethany, I would love to hear, and I'm sure other people are excited to hear about any work that you have in the pipeline. That is something that I was wondering about while I was reading your book, because I know right at the beginning it says this is Bethany's first book, and right at the end, you delve into all the modern research that we have on attachment theory and some other kind of studies there. So it kind of had my mind wandering as to what you might do next.
Well, I'm currently trying to figure out how to get Mary Ainsworth's Infancy in Uganda published.
Wow.
So if anyone wants to help me with that, so there's that. But I'm actually trying to write a screenplay about monastery, about Zen and spiritual bypass, and when we use spiritual or religious experience to bypass our emotions. And so it's something I've never done before. And I'm not planning on writing another book about attachment, because I've spent a lot of time with attachment. I love it. It's, and I love Mary. And so I'd like to work with Mary specifically in her teachings. And I love working with people. I love talking to people. I love working with people on their books. I love this kind of a thing, but I don't think I will write another book about attachment.
Right. Okay. So I love the sounds of that screenplay. And I know also in this book, you do mention how our attachment style or pattern plays into how we perceive or relate with God.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll leave it at that. Yes.
Yes. And I understand that you have some work, you work with writers. So Bethany works with anyone who's aspiring to be a writer or a healing writer, and you do workshops around that are coming up soon too.
Yeah, I have a group of therapists or healers who want to write books, and that is full, but I'm taking names for the next round. And then I do individual book coaching as well. And I will be in the new year starting an Instagram live weekly for people who want to just come and ask questions about writing a book. And then I'm going to be starting, as you mentioned, this free study group on the secret teachings of Mary Ainsworth, which will be open to everybody. It'll be one Zoom call a month for 2 hours. The timing might be weird for you guys, but all the details will be on my website shortly. I'm kind of working all that out, but it's been such an amazing year for me, even in the midst of all of the horrors of the pandemic and Donald Trump and everything else, but
Mhm.
I have felt, you know, so much bounty from this work and talking to people like you, and I want to really give back and contribute to this conversation and to help people write their own books.
Wow, sounds fascinating. I think that there's so many people like me who have like a hidden dream or desire to do something with their work and turn it into a book. So I'm sure that's of interest for a lot of people. One sort of last question for the night, or our night in your morning. How is it, or what was this like for you, Bethany, having someone reach out, or having us reach out from Pakistan? Was that a surprise, or how globalized does it feel?
Yeah, well, the book has been published in the UK, and Australia, and and Romania. It's going to be published in Romania soon, and it was just bought in China.
Wow.
So that's cool. But
Mhm.
Pakistan is just so exciting to me. I am so intrigued, and because of the collectivist culture, and because just haven't, I just didn't think that that would happen. So I was thrilled, and I'm really curious about your work and what it's like to be a therapist in a culture like that, and how attachment theory is landing there. So I would love to be in touch and to hear more. And I'm super curious and very, very, I'm open, and I'd love to hear
Mhm. Yeah, I would love that. I was actually in a workshop with a professor from Harvard speaking about attachment theory in the family system, and we had some people log in from here asking questions about, how does that relate to us? And we just had to, or she said that, we just don't know. We just don't know enough. We just don't have research. So it would be fascinating to be part of that.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, I also did want to add in where everyone could find your book, because I've had so
Oh,
many people asking me. So guys, you can get this at The Last Word. They have run short, but they are getting another shipment in soon. So I'm
I
going to
love
post
that. Oh my gosh,
yeah,
so great.
post The Last Word link where you can place your orders, and hopefully we should have some more copies here soon.
Also, if you go onto my website and sign up for my mailing list, you'll get the first 25 pages for free.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great.
Oh yeah, sign up for my mailing list so that you can see my blogs. I'm blogging once a week on attachment and on writing.
Mm.
And if you give me your email, you'll get all these updates about all of these things about the study group. And in terms of, I have been invited to some academic groups. I'm going to be teaching some psychologists in California, doing a seminar there, which I'm really so touched
Mm.
about. And so I really want to bring Mary's work to the profession, because she has been so sidelined. And so as a feminist, as a lifelong feminist, I consider this part of my work. So
Mm.
any opportunities to share her work, to talk, to be part of study groups or classes or anything, I'm really super, not just open to it, but I'm hungry for it, because she's not been given her due.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. Definitely feels like it after reading this book. But thank you so much for taking out the time to join us here today, Bethany. This was wonderful. I loved being in conversation with you.
Me too. I really appreciate it. And
All
people
right,
can reach
great.
out to me directly too.
Yeah, I think that you have a bunch of questions there to you in the
Or the
chat.
questions in the chat for me to look at.
Yeah, so you can have a look at those and maybe drop some messages.
Oh, so I can just go in there and then answer the questions?
It'll show up. I'll send you the link.
Oh, okay. So I don't need to, we'll get off this and then you'll send me the link.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you.
Bethany.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.